the chamber arms, making the pipe smaller, so you increase the flow when you decrease the diameter.
Right.
Is that the same thing that's going to cause these red skies?
Well, the actual composition of the atmosphere is going to slowly begin to change. There are a host of new particles coming from the sun. As I said probably 2 years ago, the chemistry of the sun is physically changing, and some of these new particles coming from the sun will directly impact our atmosphere. Not to mention, we're picking up a lot of debris, dust from space that is adding or bonding to the water molecules in the atmosphere. So we're undergoing quite the change.
Most people are aware of what I call periodic cataclysms that strike the planet. One of the things that people should know, and I get into a little astrophysics now, is that our star system is a trinary star system. Most in the galaxy are binary or trinary. Over 73% of them are at least binary, and a good percentage, around 15 to 18%, are trinary. It's very rare to see a star that actually doesn't have a partner.
Watch out for the shock, it's coming. Holy smoking Toledos.
And the kind of partners you have is you have usually a failed star we call a brown dwarf or a red dwarf. A red dwarf star because it burns its fuel very slowly. Our star, which is a yellow dwarf, is likely to go for at least another 5 to 10 billion years. But the red dwarf stars can go because of the rate that they burn fuel for 100 trillion years. And they have a magnetic field 100 times to 200 times stronger than our planet, our sun. Even though they may be only 10 to 20% of the mass, their temperature is only about 5 degrees above absolute zero, but they have a magnetic field 200 times stronger. And when the folds of the magnetic field flip and cross, which causes a coronal mass ejection, you get a CME, or coronal mass ejection, or a solar storm. The storms that occurred on red dwarfs are actually hundreds or even thousands of times more energetic. And the flux fields of their magnetic field are so strong they can affect planets and stars up to a light year or more away. So they affect things like the Higgs field, which is a gravitonic, not the gravitonic field, but what's called the embedded space-time field. So they can alter plate tectonics and planets that have plate tectonics. They can cause stars to get more active. They can cause unusual things to occur on distant objects throughout the solar system. And we have an object that has been previously named the Destroyer, Herculebus. Some people call it Nibiru, but it's not a planet, it's a star, and it does have orbiting objects around it.
Now we're in volcano mode here, and we'll start in Iceland, and this would not be getting that much attention if we had not had the event 4 years ago, which of course paralyzed European airspace. That is not happening now because we have a different kind of eruption, similar volcano, but different kind of eruption. We are now back to orange, which is good. Red is the bad one. That is when we're talking about imminent eruption and the potential for, of course, air delays. Now, alert level back to orange. We were at red alert on the Friday because what we had was an eruption, but it was a fissure eruption, so it wasn't the main chamber eruption. We'll continue to monitor that volcano, but looks pretty quiet right now as I've been watching it here. But as we fly you into the close to the equator here, what we're looking at here is the Papua New Guinea volcano, Taborvor, and we have stunning imagery from this one here. Certainly way more impressive than Iceland. If this were occurring in Iceland, we'd be in big trouble. But this is down further south, no glaciers here, and we don't have to worry about a widespread air travel situation. But look at that. Can you imagine watching that out your window? A lot of people were, and they were sending the pictures along with it. There you see some incredible images, and behind me, some more spectacular imagery. Look at this one here. That is just, look at that with the sun there. Glimmer, postcard perfect, but scary stuff as well. Of course, if you live anywhere nearby, and they've been evacuating some folks there as well. And this one has caused air travel disruptions a little bit more widespread than Iceland, because we're involving Indonesia as well here with some delays as well, although most of the activity has been across Papua New Guinea. And then we have the flight restrictions depending on the flight level here. The pilots will certainly be aware of that. But unlike Iceland, we don't have the danger of the jet stream picking this up, because subtropical jets to the south and to the north, and here what we'll have is just this ash disperse over the region, and that is just fine with us. And then we have this other volcano here, Mayon, which is now at alert 2. They did use different kind of alerts. Some use colors, some use numbers. That's okay. This was alert 2 here, so we're watching this one for potential eruption, and we do have a lot of people living nearby, 182,000 to be specific, so we'll monitor this one closely as well. And then the Japan one, which we'll get to at some point as well.
I know. I don't remember when we've had so many volcanoes.
It's like almost volcano season. Incredible.
Thank you, Ivan.
You actually look at the history. The object that returns to our solar system about every 3,650 years is a red dwarf. Red dwarfs are really common in our galaxy.
Dangerous to us?
Very dangerous. And what happens is when the red dwarf returns, there's really good evidence that we had, if you look at Velikovsky's research, because it's strong magnetic fields.
Tell him who Emmanuel Velikovsky, a visionary who wrote in the 50s and 60s about a solar system that we live in movement, under electromagnetic flux. It's an electric universe, basically. It's what the Thunderbolts people are pushing. That's what Velikovsky pushed.
He had enough respect from Albert Einstein. They were good friends, so it wasn't just like a...
Yeah. No, he wasn't a flake.
Just a fruitful guy, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And he theorized that these red dwarf stars would carry iron ore dust, and in their tail and also in their corona. In other words, a big bubble around the head of the red dwarf that could be quite expansive. And because you can't see these, you can only see them with an X-ray telescope or infrared telescope like IRAS, the infrared telescopes, or SOHO.
Is that why the Vatican built the world's largest infrared scope in Arizona?
Yeah, they're
looking for something.
Also in in Antarctica, the McMurdo base, because I actually took care of people going back and forth for a year and a half that were actually going to McMurdo to our SPT classified projects.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the SPT we have what's called a pi meson scope that's below the ice field, and what they would do is called pi meson sensors that are up to 3/4 of a mile under the ice shelf. And those pi mesons, basically, they pick up and build up a picture of the galaxy based on the pi mesons, because pi mesons will go into the planet or stars or anything, and basically nothing stops them. And they have what's called pi meson detectors. The other thing is that they have all kinds of different scopes. For example, about 4 years ago, a German Zeiss-based infrared telescope was put on a US 747. So they have this flying US 747 that go 45, 50,000 feet up as high as one of these can go. And they can image basically almost as good in far infrared as the Hubble telescope could do in the visual. And they were looking very much for the perturbations of the planets Uranus and Neptune, since Tycho Brahe, the Danish astronomer, discovered this over 100 years ago. And all of the theoretical physicists know that there's large objects. Now, they recently discovered what's called a super-Earth, estimated in the Oort cloud at about 0.73 light years to be about 10 times the size of Earth out there. And they found Setna and other planetoid-like objects. That's why they demoted Pluto. But the fact is, though, there's an object in deep space that's just above absolute zero, and it's probably a red dwarf, and it's probably pushing comets into our inner solar system.
Well, now, am I right? When they recently came up with the object that was bigger than Pluto, further out,
that's right.
Its orbit suggested what you're talking about. There's no proof of it, but it suggested it because of the mechanics.
Because of the gravitonic effect and the space-time effects.
The orbital mechanics. I got you.
Right, and the first time the perturbations were picked up was by this Danish astronomer. So putting it all together, including my classified sources, we are visited by an object that's called a destroyer. It's called the Dragon Star. It's called Herculebus. There's dozens of names. Almost every people on Earth have a name for it. And when it comes into the solar system, you don't see it until it comes near the sun, and then you see wings of fire, plasma, that reach off it from this basically dark star, if you want to call it dark star. And it causes major super solar storms on the sun, which trigger off earthquakes, volcanoes. As it comes into the solar system, whether it's the corona or the tail, whether it's on its entry phase or exit phase, it has a tail of iron ore, which Velikovsky predicted, and which fits in also with the story that I spent an entire evening with Dr. Isley, the PhD physicist, owner of Vitamin Cottage and founder of the World Constitution Parliament Association under the United Nations. And their idea was to put iron ore to capture carbon dioxide and have it go to the ocean floor. And what they discovered, iron ore caused a massive bloom of algae. When the algae then bloomed, they would then die and go to the bottom of the ocean floor and carry the CO2 with their dead bodies. So what we're seeing all around the world, and you can Google this, is the number of rivers, streams, like the Jiangong section of the Yellow River, Yangtze, Switzerland, all over the world you'll see questions. All of a sudden, these rivers and areas become red. And then, of course, they talk about an algae bloom. So this is totally separate from Fukushima. What it means, basically, is these are warning signs that a period of rapidly increasing dangerous coronal mass ejections and earthquakes is coming.
Okay, all right. Hold it
whether
right
it's
there.
Years or decades.
Yeah.
But these,
hold on. We'll come back, and I want you to just rewind a little bit. We'll revisit that in just a minute. Got to take our break. Be right back with Dr. Bill. Hang on. Back that up just a little bit and carry on with your conversation.
I'll roll it back a bit. If you look at just Google the term rivers turning red.
Okay, sure.
For example,
history is full
rivers
of
turned red
legends about
2014.
this. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they just put it up on your Google or a search engine. What you'll discover is there's a lot of rivers turning red, and some of them will claim that it happened because somebody dumped something, like in Beirut. They thought they dumped some kind of a toxic red chemical. They're surprised in Britain, or they off the beaches in Sydney, Australia, where they think it's a red tide. The fact is that this is very typical. If you put water and you add iron to it and have sunlight, it's going to give you a red hue. As you get a massive bloom and then you get a dinoflagellate bloom afterward, and you end up with a red tide. And that's also part of the reason why you're going to get an increase to, on its own, of domoic acid, because there's a release of iron that occurs periodically that can be a factor causing a red tide. They happen in the Red Sea. This is one of the reasons why it's prescribed against eating shellfish, because they concentrate domoic acid. Mm-hmm. And when you add other radiotoxins, they actually speed this process up. So if you have cesium in the background, it increases it quite a bit. It's cesium-137, just like that growth factor. So, for example, it's an analog of potassium magnesium. So if you get cesium-137, we're already having 10 and 12-year-olds in Fukushima Prefecture going back home and are having cardiac arrhythmias and heart failure. So the reason why I mentioned this about the red is it actually goes right back to the Bible. And if you research the astrobiology and the astrophysics of what's happening here, what happened is 3,600 years ago in the Eastern Mediterranean, it was the last remnants of the Atlantean Empire in the Minoans. And they were the most advanced. They had flush toilets, they had all kinds of technology. And what happened is the island of Thera blew up. It was a volcanic island. And it was the debris from that island that landed on Egypt and on the areas of the Second Empire, the Second Kingdom of the Egyptians. Beforehand, of course, the Nile River turned red, which is an algae bloom, and it all fits that. What we're seeing here is things like telluric currents, which occur in the ground, mm-hmm. which drive frogs out and animals out of the ground. Because mm-hmm. when you're getting a large magnetic object passing the Earth, you're going to have these weird things, like things that are in the ground are driven out by very powerful ground currents called telluric currents.
Yeah.
So what I think we're facing here is we've had a massive increase in earthquakes, and we're also having a lot of sinkholes all over the world. We're having release of methane hydrates that are also being released from deep in the ground, including high levels of radon. And a lot of these things are happening spontaneously because the Earth is being magnetically operated at a great distance by this object. And I think what we're going to have is massive increases in earthquakes, which means we don't have a lot of time to remediate these plants so they won't break down and cause many Fukushimas.
Even if we started tomorrow, we don't have enough time. There's so much work.
I don't know when it'll happen. The thing is, all we're saying here is that these signs are equivalent. It appears that we are probably reaching that time period around 3,650 years roughly, where this object returns to the solar system. And if you actually look at the historical record, it may not do it the first time, might be in multiples of it the second or third time, but it might also fit in with the Younger Dryas period, which is between 11,000 and 12,000 years ago, where we had 1,000 years of darkness. We had another, if you want to call it, relapse into the Ice Age that was present before that, called the Younger Dryas period. And of course, that period of our Ice Age also occurred around 13,000 years ago when we had a nuclear war, with remnants of those nuclei present in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and northwestern India, which is near the, and they were actually near Bombay, India. So these things have been well investigated by chemists that are not religious, and they proved those nuclei couldn't be formed by an impact from an asteroid or comet or any other space object. They were created by a nuclear explosion on the ground. And there's also remnants of certain isotopes that could only occur in a nuclear war. Xenon-129, I think, is one of them. So what I think we're facing is we're going to have increasing cataclysms of global climate acceleration, of bad weather, of ozone hole deterioration, which is amplified by not only the radioiodine, but also other gases, and it's also aggravated by massive fluctuations in the magnetic flux field of the Earth, because the Earth field has been decreasing for thousands of years, and when there's an external field affecting that, and the world's oxygen concentration is relatively dropping because the number of dead zones in the oceans are increasing, like the Gulf of Mexico. After the drilling at the Macondo drill site, we now have the invasion of Australian jellies because they don't need oxygen, because a lot of the Gulf of Mexico is basically a dead zone. There's very low oxygen in great parts of the Gulf of Mexico now. There's, I think, around 10,000 zones, some of them up to 200,000 or 300,000 square miles of the oceans around the world that are dead now, basically hypo-oxygenated.
Gone.
And they're gone. And we have a giant ozone hole, magnetosphere hole in the South Atlantic that, well, you have to fly around or lock up your communications and your ability to your avionics, which the Russians discovered when they were doing some contract work down in the area. They were actually going to do some weather modification for the Brazilians near Sao Paulo to push some cyclones up. And there were some flights that had some serious disruption from NASA, I think 5 years ago, put 5 satellites up in the upper, inside the third belt of the Van Allen radiation belt, about 20,000 miles out. And they discovered that magnetosphere hole was 5 times the diameter of the Earth at that distance. So there's a lot of things happening in space weather that are anomalous, but when you take into account Volcanism theories and the presence of iron ore in these red tides and the wisps, even when the Halley's Comet, where there are specific molecules are present in the tail of Halley's Comet, and those are virtually identical to some very simple forms of nerve gas.
Remember, it's Halley's Comet.
Halley's Comet. So in other words, Halley's Comet has in its tail toxic chemicals that can actually affect animals and humans in terms of their behavior, and has potential concentrations are high enough to kill.
Now that's very interesting. I have not heard that before.
Right. We have this from my chemist friends and others that have actually shown that Halley's does have the potential, depending on how deep we pass through the tail of it. So we can think of the Earth as a closed loop. The plasma of the Earth's ionosphere is directly connected to space weather, and space weather is affected by these objects, like these highly magnetic objects, the red dwarf stars, and by comets that also can, perturb the magnetosphere of the Earth and cause earthquakes and volcanoes. Now, if you take on Earth, we are dependent on technology like nuclear reactors that we wrote a sharp pencil to say
we're really not.
I'm Ron Martin.
And I'm Kim Lemon. People in several Lancaster County communities are finding dead birds.
A neighborhood that invites birds in wants to know what wiped hundreds of them out.
I think it was coming out maybe to get the newspaper, and he thought, he stepped on something, he thought it was a leaf.
The dead birds lined Dana Shannon's sidewalk and driveway on Magnolia Drive in Leola.
Just kind of grossed out.
Now they're in her backyard.
This one here was certainly unusual. It's a significant event.
In this neighborhood,
1, 2, 3.
There are just as many dead birds.
4, 5.
If not more.
I'm sure if we walk around here, we're going to find more dead birds.
The storm that rolled through the inland northwest last night did more damage than just knock down some trees and power lines. It killed 8 head of cattle. 3 cows and 4 calves on Jim Hoffman's pasture near Harrington were hit by lightning, killing them instantly. Hoffman says that he's been ranching for decades. He's never seen anything like it.
Assess what sort of state they were in and if they could be approached. I didn't know, I'm not knowing anything about dolphins, whether or not they'd be aggressive or you know, if they could do any harm if you sort of came close to them. You've got to try and picture the scene. You've got this sort of the sea coming in waves every few seconds.
I want to begin with the massive wall of water and the now deadly mudslide in Southern California, stranding thousands in just an instant.
Overnight flash flooding sending a river of mud and debris through Southern California, swallowing cars, campers, and vans. It's unbelievable. Thunderstorms brought flash floods, as much as 4 inches falling in 1 hour, causing a wall of debris to cut off access to 2 mountain towns, leaving at least 2,000 stranded. In one terrifying moment, this Seattle man says he was struck by lightning. Lightning also struck this tree in Washington, starting another fire. More lightning was spotted across Arizona overnight.
But this is the worst we've had since at least 1969.
That water is desperately needed elsewhere in the state. More than a dozen fires currently burning in northern and central California.
Extreme weather in the western United States has resulted in many landslides and wildfires this year up and down the west coast.
Heavy rains behind a landslide in North Salt Lake, Utah. 1 home's destroyed, a dozen others around it have been evacuated because the rain-soaked land beneath started giving way overnight. The storm front earlier Monday led to flash flooding in Nevada that shut down roads near Las Vegas. Get out! Get out! And created a near tragic scene when a wall of water trapped an elderly couple inside their Prius.
Wasn't the only extreme weather event yesterday. The National Weather Service confirms a rare tornado touched down in Clark County. This is extremely rare.
I know, it seems hard to believe.
Officials say that it was on the ground for about 30 seconds near Nelson's Landing.
Well, Hawaii braces for 2 hurricanes in the Pacific Ocean, but they first dealt with an earthquake.
The day began with a magnitude 4.5 earthquake. There were no injuries or damage, but the day will end with the first of 2 hurricanes, a rare double threat.
Hawaii is standing up to the biggest storm to hit the islands in 22 years. Tropical storm Iselle weakened as it approached landfall, but heavy rain is causing some flash flooding.
Even though Iselle has been downgraded to a tropical storm, she's still very much a force to be reckoned with. We're getting gusts in the area that are very consistent, even though their strength is rather unexpected. Very heavy winds, very heavy rains. That said, there is a flood advisory that's been issued for the entire island.
Flooding emergency hitting several states this evening. These pictures coming in from Detroit. Torrential rains. 2 people have died. 1 woman in her basement, another in her car.
Flash floods swallowing parts of the Northeast, forcing land to give way near Pittsburgh. Almost a half-foot of rain falling. The water rising to the clearance under highways. Only the tops of cars visible from above. Today, mud-caked and still underwater. Land giving way. Highways crumbling. Parts of southeast Michigan in a state of emergency.
I've never seen anything like this in my whole life.
This is not what you expect to see at your local strip mall. A sinkhole opening up after extreme flooding here. So many people across this nation feeling Mother Nature's fury.
It's that dangerous flooding from some very potent storms that have dumped more than a foot of rain in some parts of the East Coast. Take a look at this. That's the Southern State Parkway in Nassau County.
Kearney, Nebraska. This was a Good Samaritan hospital, the cafeteria here, just to show you the sheer force of these flooding waters just raced through when the doors couldn't handle it anymore. And we were seeing it all over as people were being rescued. And it's not just the East Coast, it's the West Coast too.
It's horrible. I've never seen anything like this.
Well, it looks like a storm of epic proportions. It's something we really don't see here in Alabama. But take a look at this. You're looking at a huge storm known as a haboob. That's eastern Washington state you're looking at. Now, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they can pack winds up to 60 miles an hour, and they stir up all that dust and sand.
It's ominous looking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a terrifying look. It's like something you'd see out of a sci-fi movie.
This amazing video of a bolt of lightning hitting right in front of a woman. This is at a hotel in Florida over the weekend. No, she didn't expect this.
I got that first one.
Yeah, and you got the second one too. It was taken at the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach and posted on Facebook, and obviously it's going to go viral here. The woman is frighteningly close to the lightning strike, but even so, was not injured, thankfully.
I got that first one.
If you thought our Maryland summer was cool, try living in Scotland right now. The country is on track to see the coldest August spell in 95 years. Even the mountains of Scotland may see some snow. That's expected for the first time in almost 100 years.
A flash of light and a loud boom have a lot of people asking, what was that? Late last night, a massive fireball lit up Vancouver's skies. CTV's John Woodward went to find out what many people witnessed.
Something like this was spotted around 10 o'clock last night, high over Vancouver.
A greenish-coloured streak that split into two and spread across the sky, and they just completely burnt out.
Seen as far away as Vancouver Island. Many people all over the lower mainland took to Twitter to say they saw the meteor. Though it happened so fast, no one had time to pull out a camera.
I feel very fortunate to have seen what we saw. This, I think, is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of event.
Mexico. This crack stretches nearly 2/3 of a mile and measures close to 30 feet deep and more than 15 feet wide across in some spots. This is in the rural area 50 miles west of the city of Hermosillo in the state of Sonora. While some believe seismic activity is to blame, others point to an underground stream that eroded the ground above it. Now, this incredible video was captured by a drone.
We've had just about every kind of extreme weather in the past 24 hours. Half a foot of rain fell in the Midwest and Washington state. Mudslides damaged homes and covered highways.
In this country, we're keeping an eye on a triple threat of severe weather threatening millions as we head into the weekend. Torrential downpours swept through a good swath of the country today, causing major flooding in the Midwest. And in the South, extreme heat and severe storms with damaging winds have several states on alert.
Quick-moving storms dumped nearly 10 inches of heavy rain on parts of the Midwest early this morning. Stretches of highway under waist-deep water had to be closed as cars were nearly swept away. In Indiana, dozens of drivers made wrong turns into treacherous waters. Those flooded roads also made it difficult for firefighters to get to a burning building. Flooding is not just a problem in the Midwest. From upstate New York to western Pennsylvania, creeks unexpectedly overflowed into homes.
We've been here for 25 years, and this is the worst we've had.
Across the country in Washington state, heavy rains triggered mudslides, which blocked highways, stranding some motorists overnight. In Arizona and Southern California, it was the lack of moisture and strong wind that created a blinding dust storm. And in the South, brutal triple-digit temperatures are a concern heading into this weekend.
The fire captain in the city of Napa, California, says it was the worst shaking he has ever experienced. The quake hit in the dead of night, setting off raging fires like this one, sending bottles flying off the shelves in the heart of wine country. Look at this surveillance video. Cameras rolling during the quake itself, vehicles shaking as debris falls all around. And there it is on the map, the magnitude 6.0 quake hitting just north of San Francisco. The governor has declared a state of emergency tonight.
3:20 a.m. Sunday, the quake strikes in the dead of night. The earth-shattering moment caught on surveillance video, shaking people out of bed.
I woke up and thought, oh my God, this is it. You know, this is the big one.
These store shelves thrashed around before the power goes out. Seconds later, the shaking is over, but the chaos has just begun. The monster 6.0 quake, the worst to hit the Bay Area in 25 years. Fires rage in the scenic tourist town of Napa. More than a dozen buildings in the historic downtown ravaged. Shattered glass, cars buried in brick, and roads ripped wide open. Control tower windows at Napa County Airport completely blown out, and this clock frozen in time.
After this morning's earthquake in Napa, California, concerns tonight about another earthquake, a magnitude 7.0 earthquake that struck just a short time ago in Peru. Chad, what do you say? Any tie between a quake in Northern California and one south of there in Peru in South America?
You know, Jim, if the Northern California quake was much bigger, then I would say yes, there's a potential that there could be some teleconnection, but likely not here with a 6.0 and Peru down as a 7.0.
Let's turn to Central America, which has been in the grip of one of the worst droughts in decades.
The government of Guatemala has actually declared a state of emergency as a result of the prolonged drought the country has been suffering. More than 200,000 families have now been affected as crops have failed across the country. And Guatemala is not alone in its plight. Drought has also been affecting neighbouring Honduras, El Salvador and nearby Nicaragua.
Iceland continues to prepare this morning for a possible volcano eruption. The volcano, buried deep under one of Europe's largest glaciers, is rumbling to life. Since August 16th, more than 3,000 tremors per minute have led to more than 2,600 earthquakes.
And just this morning, a 5.7 earthquake rumbled across the glacier. And so scientists are very nervous.
Big mystery this morning. Good morning, everyone. Residents in Harrisburg are still trying to figure out exactly what those flashing lights are. Aliens? A drone, maybe? Well, even the local police department does not have an answer.
Oh, I am scared to death now.
It's the video that's sparking rumors of extraterrestrial life.
I thought it was a plane until I realized it wasn't moving, and I watched it for about 20 minutes.
Wilkerson called 911.
Look at that, look at that, look at that!
But even police were dumbfounded.
He went there, and apparently he saw them too. So he called his sergeant and his corporal to come to verify what he was seeing.
So police called the National Guard Training Center and the local airports to find out if they could account for any aircraft activity in the area. They couldn't.
This is unbelievable.
This isn't the first UFO sighting in recent weeks. In July, this questionable object was spotted as firefighters battled a wildfire in Canada. And just 2 weeks ago, these photos were posted all over Twitter, convincing many that the illuminated round disc was something extraterrestrial. Back in Pennsylvania, Wilkerson says she's convinced these lights prove we're not alone.
Well, evacuations are underway this afternoon in Papua New Guinea after a volcano erupted.
Woke up this morning and there she blows. That's something you see every day, isn't it?
People who live in nearby towns say there is about a half an inch of ash on the ground. An Australian airline made some minor adjustments as well to flight paths between Sydney and Asia. Look at that.
It has been another day of monster waves and dangerous rip currents on both parts of both coasts in this country. Two powerful storms are responsible. Hurricane Cristobal in the Atlantic and Tropical Storm Marie in the Pacific. In Southern California, the surf hasn't been this big in nearly 20 years, drawing big wave surfers and huge crowds.
Pounding surf also caused this damage to a Catalina Island dry dock and ripped apart a lifeguard building that's a Malibu landmark.
We begin with two powerful storms far from land that are still managing to pose a deadly double threat on beaches along the west and east coasts of the United States tonight, killing at least 3 people so far.
Tropical Storm Marie is churning in the Pacific. The monster storm generating incredible waves hundreds of miles away.
Marie is west of the southern tip of Baja now, throwing a big south swell up into our area in some of the highest wave conditions we've seen in years.
It sounded like a thunderstorm, like if it was rain, like if it was lightning, thundering. That's how powerful, because you could feel the ground, you could feel it.
Tonight from Los Angeles to Jacksonville, Florida.
First at 5, rough surf and red flag.
I was filming over my shoulder, like over the sky, and it just lightning going off everywhere, and coming out here in summer, I was like, gosh, I just hope for lightning thunderstorms.
Cece Wesky is visiting her mom, Stephanie, in Hayden, Idaho.
I've always been just obsessed with rain and thunder and lightning.
And on Tuesday night, she got her wish.
It was the most unexpected thing that's, I think, ever happened to me.
It's my girl on the street videoing the lightning.
Her video shows what appears to be a bolt of lightning hitting her mom.
It sounded like somebody shot a gun right here.
Well, some residents in Ponca City say they were recently treated to an amazing sight in the sky. It happened as that city prepared to say farewell to a landmark by watching one final movie at the airline drive-in.
Well, Kevin, one of those moviegoers says she was able to capture a picture of God in the clouds, and she says that picture has changed her life forever. Mandy Molman says God made his appearance, not on the big screen, but as a face in the clouds over her daughter's shoulder. And she says there's proof in this picture.
I just thought it was neat and ironic, God making his appearance to say that he is not dead, that he is very much alive.
Extracts originate from bibliotecapplides.net, titled Nibiru and the Lemurian Connection by Greg Jenner, the Dark Star website, Lemuria. Mainstream history has chosen to forget about this lost continent that once existed in the Pacific. To many esoteric researchers, including me, Lemuria should be included in academic textbooks. One such educational book that does include Lemurian history was published by an obscure Rosicrucian sect called the Stellar Group, or the Lemurian Fellowship, based out of Stella, Illinois and San Jose, California, respectively. I managed to get my hands on a copy of this rare textbook entitled The Ultimate Frontier, Exhibit A, Eklal Kushana, The Ultimate Frontier, 1963. The inside jacket cover says the following: some of the fascinating subjects discussed in this Ultimate Frontier are the evidence of a magnificent civilization that once flourished on the now submerged continent of Lemuria in the Pacific Ocean, a moving story of communities that are actually living by this Lemurian philosophy, a master plan dating from 4700 BC and involving the Great Pyramid for establishing in October AD 2001 a new nation dedicated to the uplift of all mankind. The Ultimate Frontier describes the mysteries of human existence and may well mark the beginning of a much greater phase of Western civilization. I must admit the intro of this book does seem a little cultish, but I believe the Rosicrucians are onto something here to suggest the Lemurian continent was very physical and very real. Why did Lemuria submerge into the Pacific Ocean? According to North American Rosicrucian adepts, this occurred because of a pole shift. More importantly, though, what was the reason or trigger for a pole shift? I've always argued that a pole shift can only occur from the magnetic field interaction of a planetary body passing near by, such as Nibiru. Have the Rosicrucians and Freemasons acquired ancient knowledge of this celestial intruder? I say yes, and each brotherhood gives tantalizing clues of this through symbolic pictures. They also speak of a dark satellite and a blazing star. Before getting into that, however, let's first look at this mysterious continent known as Mu. The Lost Continent of Mu, Exhibit B, David Hatcher, Childress, Lost Cities of Ancient Lemuria and the Pacific, 1988. One of the great proponents of Lemuria or Mu was James Churchward, an Anglo-American who spent a great deal of his life in India. Here he is initiated into certain Eastern esoteric truths, being shown supposedly some ancient tablets in an Indian Tibetan monastery. There have been many Tibetan monasteries in India for hundreds, if not thousands of years. He was taught how to read the tablets and was told many fascinating things about ancient history. Then, after travelling all over the world, he wrote a series of very popular books, the first one entitled The Lost Continent of Mu. Churchward's books added a great deal to the story of information available on Lemuria. While Churchward had his inaccuracies, he nevertheless had many interesting things to say. Furthermore, one can find substantiation for much of his information. In the year 1900, at Dunang, a small desert town on the border of northern Tibet, a Taoist monk found a hidden library inside a cliff honeycombed with caves. The room had been walled up with bricks in the 11th century to keep it from falling into the hands of invading barbarians. For 800 years the book had lain there, preserved by the dry desert air and maintained in excellent condition. Then the famous explorer and archaeologist Sir R.L. Stein passed through Dunang in 1907 and persuaded the monk to allow him to view the treasure, which was at the time still kept in the secret subterranean cave. He found Buddhist texts in many languages: Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, and some in languages that were completely unknown. Just how old some of the texts were impossible to tell, but they had probably already been copied over several times from earlier texts. The originals could have been written hundreds and perhaps thousands of years ago. Amazingly, one of these manuscripts had fragments of an ancient map which showed parts of a continent in the Pacific Ocean. The Ultimate Frontier states that Lemuria had been a large continent in the Pacific, which had encompassed all the present-day Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Oceania, Western North America, and everything in between. The continent's real name had been Mukulia, or Mu. According to the Fellowship, these Lemurians built great cities out of stone and under the direction of the so-called elders went on to create an advanced civilization. As the Mukulian Empire grew, more people wanted to be part of it. Persons from all the valleys of Mukulia eventually joined the Empire of the Sun. The Ultimate Frontier says the Lemurian or Mukulian civilization lasted in the form of an empire for 52,000 years and reached heights so great that our present civilization can barely be considered a civilization when compared to it. Government, religion, and science achieved such perfection as to be far beyond our present comprehension. Western civilization is only about 2,500 years old and has narrowly survived its power-seeking rulers and priests. Our science and technology are but in their infancy and as yet consist of relatively few rediscoveries. Mankind's first civilization rose 78,000 years ago on this giant continent, and it lasted an astonishing 52,000 years. It was destroyed in an earthquake which had been generated by a pole shift occurring some 26,000 years ago, or at approximately 24,000 BC. The continent was so large that when it sank, The oceans of the world became drastically lowered as water rushed into the newly formed Pacific Basin. The relatively small islands which had existed in the Atlantic during the time of the Lemurian civilization were left high and dry by the receding ocean. The newly emerged land joined the Posset archipelago of the Atlantic Ocean to form a small continent. This continent is called Atlantis by historians today. Its real name was Posset. The Lemurian civilization had survived many pole shifts previously, building its structures out of gigantic blocks of stone, fitted together in structures designed to last tens of thousands of years. Because the area of the Hawaiian Islands were one of the pivot points in the pole shifts that took place every 10,000 years or so, the citizenry of the Volcanism Empire were generally spared the massive destruction that typically takes place in such an event. Nibiru, the mountain maker. Mountains, why are we so fascinated with them? Since the beginning of human history, people have felt compelled to explore their lofty summits and deep caverns within their broad extremities. This ageless attraction seems to be inherently ingrained in our human psyche. But why? One reason is that mountains are associated with the spiritual realm and are deeply rooted in religious traditions. The Hindu Vedas speak of the Himalayas, where Rama flew north to Mount Meru. The Bible speaks of Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark landed, and Mount Sinai, where Moses talked to God. American native Indians speak of Mount Shasta and Teta Mountain Range, where they say was once home to an invisible ancient white race. I must admit, when I first viewed these majestic mountains, such as the Teton and Mount Shasta in person, I too sensed there was something mystical about them. There was another esoteric truth to these mountains that mainstream history wasn't telling me. But what? I just couldn't put a finger on it. Many years went by grappling with this notion, and one day, finally, the answer hit me like a ton of bricks. The revelation of rapid mountain building, a direct result from crustal slippage caused by a pole shift. Yes, I realize geologists will tell you the modus operandi theory today is plate tectonics, a very long and dull process where mountain summits increase or decrease only by 1 centimeter, give or take, every year. But geologists do not realize there is another variable at play here in nature's equation, Nibiru and the dark star. It's clear to me now, geologically speaking, the Earth goes through long periods of boredom only to have short periods of terror occur when Nibiru rolls on by. If Nibiru's path becomes close enough, tremendous gravitational pressure would build up between the two magnetic fields, resulting in a pole shift, much like how two positive magnets would repel one another when held too close together. You can actually feel a physical reaction of the two magnets slipping away from one another. Try it yourself. So if one pictures this same scenario, but more on a gargantuan scale, you can see how crustal slippage on the Earth would indeed occur. In other words, rapid mountains upthrust or downthrust designed by the grand architect of the universe, God. A fire goes before him and burns up his enemies all around. His cosmic lightning flashes in the sky within the upper atmosphere. When the people see it, they tremble. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord. To view the full transcript, go to my website, endtimes23.com, where I've posted the link.
One of these devices is HARP. HARP has a twofold type system to it. There's the part that the public is introduced to, which they call the mystique HARP or mysterious HARP. In other words, people make up their own stories about it. Then there's the true function of HARP, which is just one component to the rest of the components men have built in, outside, and hovering around this planet. And they hope to achieve some things collectively with these devices. Do they have byproducts? Yes, they do. Just like when you flick a wall switch, you don't see it, but there's a small spark. You just don't see that spark. Well, when they turn these devices on, things happen. Weather changes, static electricity forms in the atmosphere causing thunderstorms. Wind patterns do shift. On a few occasions when they're using energy weapons, the Earth's axis does in fact, it gets altered every time they do this, and they're just messing up everything. But what they're doing on purpose.
Yeah.
They're doing it on purpose.
We've talked about possibly storing energy for CERN, things like that, and getting ready maybe earlier than they said to crank this thing back up. But is it also, and let me back up, and that CERN, it could possibly open a Stargate or something like that, but also the storage of energy around the planet. And you're talking about being a component of HAARP. Would HAARP be like the barrel of the gun and the rest of this, the energy, the bullet?
Well, it could, because
in other words, if they're thinking they can use HAARP to defeat God's ark, is that what they're thinking, Michael?
It'll certainly be part of it. You know what? With Star Wars, with Reagan, here was their primary focus: a collective weapons system that would fight the impending invasion they knew about even back then. See, they discovered the invasion a long time ago. What the public doesn't know is these guys have been warned. These guys have had dreams upon dreams from messengers. Some of them come in the name of the God of Abraham and so forth. They've been convicted. There have been Christians in there that can no longer serve because of the conviction of what their organization was really serving. And these guys just won't listen. So what they've done is they've rejected God so long that now they hate Him. They hate God. They will openly state that. You know what? People should really, concerning the weather, tune into the Weather Channel on occasion because they're trying to explain these weather phenomena, and I believe they should be showing that all throughout the summer into the winter, where they explain the one of the issues they're trying to explain to everybody is the lightning discharges.
Kind of prepping everyone.
Yeah, I think because the discharges of lightning are becoming so strong, it's really affecting power lines and
the chamber arms, making the pipe smaller so you increase the flow when you decrease the diameter.
Right.
Is that the same thing that's going to cause these red skies?
Well, the actual composition of the atmosphere is going to slowly begin to change. There are a host of new particles coming from the sun. As I said probably 2 years ago, the chemistry of the sun is physically changing. And some of these new particles coming from the sun will directly impact our atmosphere. Not to mention, we're picking up a lot of debris, dust from space that is adding or bonding to the water molecules in the atmosphere. And so we're undergoing quite the change.
Most people are aware of what I call periodic cataclysms that strike the planet. One of the things that people should know, and I get into a little astrophysics now, is that our star system is a trinary star system. Most in the galaxy are binary or trinary. Over 73% of them are at least binary, and a good percentage, around 15 to 18%, are trinary. It's very rare to see a star that actually doesn't have a partner.
Watch out for the shock, it's coming. Holy smoking Toledos.
And we do have a lot of people living nearby, 182,000 to be specific, so we'll monitor this one closely as well. And then the Japan one, which we'll get to at some point as well.
I don't remember when we've had so many volcanoes.
It's like almost volcano season. Incredible.
Thank you, Ivan.
You actually look at the history, the object that returns to our solar system about every 3,650 years is a red dwarf. Red dwarfs are really common in our galaxy.
Dangerous to us?
Very dangerous. And what happens is when the red dwarf returns, there's really good evidence that we had, if you look at Velikovsky's research, because it's strong magnetic fields.
Tell him who Emmanuel Velikovsky, a visionary who wrote in the 50s and 60s about a solar system that we live in movement, under electromagnetic flux. It's an electric universe, basically. It's what the Thunderbolts people are pushing. And that's what Velikovsky pushed.
He had enough respect from Albert Einstein. They were good friends, so it wasn't just like a...
Yeah. No, he wasn't a flake.
Just a hurtful guy, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And he theorized that these red dwarf stars would carry iron ore dust, and in their tail and also in their corona. In other words, a big bubble around the head of the red dwarf that could be quite expansive. And because you can't see these, you can only see them with an X-ray telescope or infrared telescope like IRAS, infrared telescopes, or SOHO.
Is that why the Vatican built the world's largest infrared scope in Arizona?
Yeah, that's
they're looking for something.
Also in in Antarctica, the McMurdo base, because I actually took care of people going back and forth for a year and a half that were actually going to McMurdo to our SPT classified projects. Right? So the SPT we have what's called a pi meson scope that's below the ice field. And what they would do is called pi meson sensors that are up to 3/4 of a mile under the ice shelf. And those pi mesons, basically, they pick up and build up a picture of the galaxy based on the pi mesons, because pi mesons will go into the planet or stars or anything, and basically nothing stops them. And they have what's called pi meson detectors. The other thing is that they have all kinds of different scopes. For example, about 4 years ago, a German Zeiss-based infrared telescope was put on a US 747. So they have this flying US 747 that go 50,000 feet up as high as one of these can go. And they can image basically almost as good in far infrared as the Hubble telescope could do in the visual. And they were looking very much for the perturbations of the planets Uranus and Neptune, since Tycho Brahe, the Danish astronomer, discovered this over 100 years ago. And all of the theoretical physicists know that there's large objects now. The reason to discover what's called a super-Earth, estimated in the Oort cloud, about 0.73 light years to be about 10 times the size of Earth out there. And they found Setna and other planetoid-like objects. That's why they demoted Pluto. But the fact is, though, there's an object in deep space that's just above absolute zero, and it's probably a red dwarf, and it's probably pushing comets into our inner solar system.
Well, now, am I right? When they recently came up with the object that was bigger than Pluto, further out,
that's right.
Its orbit suggested what you're talking about. There's no proof of it, but it suggested it because of the mechanics.
Because of the gravitonic effect and the space-time effect.
The orbital mechanics. I got you.
Right, and the first time the perturbations are picked up is by this Danish astronomer. So putting it all together, including my classified sources, we are visited by an object that's called Destroyer. It's called the Dragon Star. It's called Herculebus. There's dozens of names. Almost every people on Earth have a name for it. And when it comes into the solar system, you don't see it until it comes near the sun, and then you see wings.
That is when we're talking about imminent eruption and the potential for, of course, air delays. Now, alert level back to orange. We were at red alert on the Friday because what we had was an eruption, but it was a fissure eruption, so it wasn't the main chamber eruption. We'll continue to monitor that volcano, but looks pretty quiet right now as I've been watching it here. But as we fly you into the close to the equator here, what we're looking at here is the Papua New Guinea volcano, Taborvor, and we have stunning imagery from this one here. Certainly way more impressive than Iceland. If this were occurring in Iceland, we'd be in big trouble. But this is down further south, no glaciers here, and we don't have to worry about a widespread air travel situation. But look at that. Can you imagine watching that out your window? A lot of people were, and they were sending the pictures along with it. There you see some incredible images, and behind me, some more spectacular imagery. Look at this one here. That is just... look at that with the sun there, glimmer, postcard perfect, but scary stuff as well. Of course, if you live anywhere nearby, and they've been evacuating some folks there as well. And this one has caused air travel disruptions a little bit more widespread than Iceland, because we're involving Indonesia as well here with some delays as well, although most of the activity has been across Papua New Guinea. And then we have the flight restrictions depending on the flight level here. The pilots will certainly be aware of that. But unlike Iceland, we don't have the danger of the jet stream picking this up, because subtropical jets to the south and to the north, and here what we'll have is just this ash disperse over the region, and that is just fine with us. And then we have this other volcano here, Mayon, which is now at alert 2. They did use different kind of alerts. Some use colors, some use numbers. That's okay. This was alert 2 here, so we're watching this one for potential eruption.
And the kind of partners you have is you have usually a failed star we call a brown dwarf or a red dwarf. A red dwarf star because it burns its fuel very slowly. Our star, which is a yellow dwarf, is likely to go for at least another 5 to 10 billion years. But the red dwarf stars can go, because of the rate that they burn fuel, for 100 trillion years. And they have a magnetic field 100 times to 200 times stronger than our planet, our sun, even though they may be only 10 to 20% of the mass. Their temperature is only about 5 degrees above absolute zero, but they have a magnetic field 200 times stronger. And when the folds of the magnetic field flip and cross, which causes a coronal mass ejection, you get a CME, or coronal mass ejection, or a solar storm. The storms that occurred on red dwarfs are actually hundreds or even thousands of times more energetic. And the flux fields of their magnetic field are so strong they can affect planets and stars up to a light year or more away. So they affect things like the Higgs field, which is a gravitonic, not the gravitonic field, but what's called the embedded space-time field. So they can alter plate tectonics and planets that have plate tectonics. They can cause stars to get more active. They can cause unusual things to occur on distant objects throughout the solar system. And we have an object that has been previously named the Destroyer, Herculebus. Some people call it Nibiru, but it's not a planet, it's a star, and it does have orbiting objects around it.
Now we're in volcano mode here, and we'll start in Iceland, and this would not be getting that much attention if we had not had the event 4 years ago, which of course paralyzed European airspace. That is not happening now because we have a different kind of eruption, similar volcano, but different kind of eruption. We are now back to orange, which is good. Red is the bad.